Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's really an honor for me to be here with you guys. So today we're going to talk about how to get into medical school, everything you've ever wanted to know. And again, as Brett was saying, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and we will get to all of your questions at the end of the presentation. So just so that you know a little bit about myself, I'm one of the associate directors of advising at MedSchoolCoach, which is a company that basically helps people become physicians. That's all we do. My undergraduate work was done at UC Berkeley, and then I went to UC San Diego for medical school, so I'm pretty much a California person. And then I came up to Orange County to do my residency in pediatrics at the Children's Hospital of Orange County. At the time there, when I became chief resident and associate program director there, we saw something like 700 applicants for 29 spots. So I've read hundreds and hundreds of applications and hundreds of personal statements, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I've been with MedSchoolCoach for several years now. So I've helped lots and lots of students as well get into medical school and everything. So kind of just talking about statistics for medical school in general. During the 2019 to 2020 application cycle, there were over 53,000 applicants, and a little less than 22,000 of those actually attended medical school. So that means almost 60% of applicants didn't get into a single medical school that year. This year, there's even more applicants than usual, probably because of COVID. So as you know, medical school is a very competitive process, and what we want to do is help you in this webinar really get your application to the place where it can be as competitive as possible. So in general, how are you going to try to ensure that you're successful with your application? You're going to do a number of things. Like the first thing is preparing and planning, and that's the most important thing to do. The people who prepare and plan tend to have the greatest success into getting into medical school, because this is kind of definitely a marathon, not a sprint. You want to put together a great application, which means getting your primary and your secondary applications done in a timely manner. And I really can't overemphasize that submitting on time factor, because schools are generally on a rolling admissions process. And so the earlier that you submit your application, the more chance that you have of getting in to medical school. So I always tell my clients to submit on day one for your primary. There should be no excuses for that, because you know that that date is coming. For your secondaries, we want you to turn those over hopefully in about 2, maybe 3 weeks or so. Again, in the more timely manner that you can turn those in, the more better chance that you have of getting into medical school. And finally, you want to interview like a champ. And we'll go through each of these different steps together. So this is sort of the timeline of applying to medical school. Those of you who are doing it already kind of know this, but if you look early in the year that you're going to apply, you want to start requesting your letters of recommendation and start studying for your MCAT. Around May and June, if you haven't already taken your MCAT, you should do it then. I like to tell people to try to take it by April, just because then you can have about a month until your results come back. And that way, when you apply at the end of May, you know already what your score is, which gives you a better idea of which schools to apply to. You want to complete your primary application. You want to make sure your transcripts get in, and you want to submit the AMCAS primary application. This year, they opened on May 28th. And so you want to try to submit as close to that day as possible. And then you get a little bit of a lag in June usually. And then once you hit July and August, you start to get your secondary applications and need to turn those in. And interviews usually start up around September and go through April or May. You can also follow up with different schools then and send update letters. And then in May or June, schools are usually by then making their admissions decisions, and you would start medical school the August of the following year after you started this whole application process. We'll keep coming back to this timeline as we go through it. So the first kind of step to making a memorable application is to make a memorable personal statement. And that's part of the primary application. That's usually part of why the part that a lot of students are really very anxious about. So the personal statement is a chance for you to tell your own personal unique story and highlight your own distinct characteristics. And I like to tell people it's basically a chance for them to see you beyond what your activities are, beyond what they can see written down on the paper about what you've actually done. You want to highlight the things about you personally that are more interesting. And the way you want to do that is to have an interesting introduction. So when I was the associate program director, I used to read all of these, like hundreds of applications. And because I had such a limited time and so many applications to read, I would generally look through a personal statement and read the first couple of sentences. And most of them were not very interesting, to be honest. I'm also kind of a strict grader. But if you start reading the first couple of sentences and it didn't really grab my attention or it wasn't very interesting, I would basically just skim the rest and not be interested and move on. That's exactly the reaction you do not want to have from the person reading your application, right? So you want to start with an interesting introduction, something that grabs their attention, something that pulls them in, that's creative, and that makes them want to continue to read more and learn more about you. You want to talk about yourself and your interests as well. The main things that you want to show through this personal statement is what your strengths are. And again, the things that you haven't been able to show just by writing about your activities and stuff. So if your strengths are that you are a hard worker and that you have a lot of compassion for people, you want those kinds of personal qualities to shine through in your personal statement. And the way that you want to make them shine through is through your experiences. So the way that you do that is not just stating, I am a hard worker, or I have a lot of compassion for people. If you just tell those things, then it's not very interesting to the reader. But the way that you want to show it is through, as you've probably learned in high school, show, not tell, right? So you want to show the reader how it is that you have demonstrated that you're a compassionate person. And you want to tell that through stories, because stories are creative, stories are interesting, and stories show them your characteristics in a way that they cannot see in their application otherwise. So for example, if I told you, I went to Mexico and I learned a lot, that may be a factual statement, but it's not very interesting and it doesn't really have any impact on you probably. But if I tell you that I was standing ankle deep in the creek while struggling to wash my laundry in the river water as the cows watched me from across the way and the mosquitoes ate my arms, like you get a mental picture at least of what it was like for me to be in rural Mexico at the time. And that mental picture is what you want to create in your reader, because that's what's going to create that emotional connection and draw to you to make them want to continue reading further. Other tips for the personal statement, you want to make sure you prepare it early. This is not something that you want to just cram and write at the last couple of weeks. You want to, hopefully, I like to tell people to have at least a rough draft finished by about March or so that you can have it edited and things in April and be ready to go with a final draft in May. Remember, the quality is more important than quantity. So it doesn't matter if you have a nice long essay if you don't say anything that's interesting. It's okay to have a shorter essay as long as the writing is very high quality and the stories are very demonstrative of who you are. And also know how much room you have to write. For the AMCAS or the MD application, you would have 5,300 characters with spaces. For the AA COMAS or the DO application, you'd have the same amount of characters. And for the Texas application or the TMD SAS, you'd have 5,000 characters. So that part is about the personal statement aspect of the primary application. The other part of the primary application is the activities section. And so what you're going to be doing in the activities section is describing the things that you've done in your extracurricular work that demonstrate the qualities that you want to demonstrate, and then show the experiences that you've had that make you a good candidate to become a physician. And so in general, this kind of writing is very different from your personal statement. This kind of writing is more black and white, where in your personal statement, you can be creative and show, not tell, and things like that. We don't want to see that kind of writing in your activity section. Your activity section should be pretty straightforward. It should show you two things. One thing is, what is it that you did? Describe your role in that activity. And the second thing would be, how did it impact you? So how did it improve your character? How did it make you a better person? How did it make you more interested in becoming a physician, or make you a better person to be a better candidate to be a physician? So that's the whole purpose of this part of the application. And again, you want to prepare it early. You want to make sure that you can write out everything, find everybody's contacts, because any volunteer activity that you've done, they want a contact supervisor so that they could talk to that person if they need to. You also have to write down like the number of hours that you worked in each of the different locations that you write down. So all of those things take time. Again, it's not something you want to cram at the last minute. So preparing that writing pretty early is a smart thing to do, as well as to get it edited. And let me say that getting things edited, whether it's your activities section or your personal statement, it's really important not to get too many people to edit your work. Because if you try to, some people will take their personal statement or their activities and give it to everyone they know and just think that they're going to get so much great feedback, it's going to be great. The reality of that is you're going to get so many different opinions because that's just the way that editing works, that you're not going to be able to what's the word? To meet everybody's expectations for all of those things. And a lot of their suggestions are going to contradict each other. And so it tends to get the writer in the end confused if you have too many editors, as well as you start to lose your voice, and your own unique voice is an important thing that needs to come through in your application. So I always say to make sure you get your activities and your personal statement edited by maybe 2 or 3 trusted people who are going to be critical. So that means if your mom thinks you're the greatest thing ever and can do no wrong, that's wonderful, and you are the greatest thing ever, but she's not necessarily the right person to edit your personal statement, because that's not going to help you make it better. You want to give it to people that will look at it critically, not be worried about hurting your feelings, and don't be hurt by their criticism, but people that are going to really help you hone it down so that it can be at the strongest personal statement or activity section that it can be. So usually that would be 2 or maybe 3 trusted people. The quality, again, is more important than the quantity. It doesn't matter if you give really long descriptions if they're not good descriptions about your extracurricular activities. And again, knowing how much room you have to write. So for your MD application, you can only choose 15 activities total. Some people have more than that. You have to start cutting out things that are not as important. It doesn't mean you have to have 15 activities. Again, if you, the quality is more important than the quantity. So if you put down 15 activities, but 5 of them are like things that you did in junior high and high school, then that's not going to look as good as if you put down 13 or 12 activities that were really strong in your undergraduate years. Each of those activities, you have 700 characters to write about them with spaces, and you can choose 3 of them to be your most memorable activities. And for those 3, you have an additional 1,325 characters to write more about that experience. So a lot of people will use the first 700 characters to describe the experience, and then the 1,325 to talk about what that experience meant to them, how it impacted and changed them. For the AA COMAS application, you have 600 characters that you can write about. There are no most memorable experiences to expand on here, so everything has to be very concise, but you can write as many activities as you want. So you can really expand it if you would like to. However, I would again say that it's more important to have quality than quantity here. For the TMD SAS application, you would have 300 characters, and you can choose 3 top characters, like the 3 most memorable, and you would have 500 characters additionally for each of those. So what are the different activities, experiences, and achievements that you can write about? They're generally looking for all of these things if possible. So if you don't have any research experience, having some research experience is important. And that can mean bench research, it can mean clinical research, and I know that things are difficult to find these days because of COVID, and that's something that's happening across the globe with everybody. And so you do have to kind of be creative with these things at this time and really look and be proactive about finding opportunities. So if you don't have any research, it's not the worst thing in the world, but someone who has research is going to have more of an advantage in general, because they want to see, medical schools want to see that you can think through a problem and apply the scientific method to it. So come up with the hypothesis, come up with methods, test your hypothesis, come up with conclusions, things like that. So some people are at this time looking more for online research opportunities, like if people have chart review sorts of things that can be done, clinical things that can be done virtually, things like that, then that might be a place that you can get some research done. or if professors have any research where you can do things virtually as well, that's not necessarily bench research, there might be opportunities like that. So it's good to do those things as much as you can. And if you can do research for at least a year, that's ideal. And even more ideal is if you can take the conclusions from your research and present a poster or do a presentation at a symposium or a conference or things like that. And the best thing is if you can get a paper published that you contributed to in an actual journal that's a well-known journal. So those kinds of publications are going to be the ones that is going to be a research experience that stands out the most to the committee. You can also show your volunteer or work activity, and they're looking for both clinical and non-clinical volunteer activity. So that means anything clinical volunteer activity would be where you're actually hands-on with patients. And from what I've seen about your website for you guys at the Equal Access Clinic Network, you guys are, it sounds like very hands-on with patients in terms of, taking vital signs and things like that. So anything like that would be clinical volunteer activity. Non-clinical volunteer activity then would be things like working at a homeless shelter, or distributing clothes to people in need, or working at a food pantry, anything like that, where you're not actually helping people in a medical capacity, so to speak, but you're volunteering your time to give to people who are in need without necessarily expecting something back in return. And so it's good to have both. And it's good to not only have kind of a variety of a few different experiences, but also to have some longitudinal experience as well. So let's say if you're a freshman right now starting out and you're looking to apply to medical school in the future, it's kind of nice to look for activities that you really enjoy doing so that you can do them over the next several years, because people want to see that you can commit to an activity and continue doing it more than just for a couple of months at a time. Shadowing is also important, and some people really look hard at shadowing and other people don't value it quite as much, but the main point of shadowing is to show that you've really looked into what it is to really be a physician on a day-to-day basis, and you know what that day-to-day basis looks like, and you still think it's the right path for you to go in your career. So that would mean that generally schools might look for more like hundreds, like 100 hours of shadowing or something like that. Whereas if you're just there for like 8 hours of shadowing total, you've seen a day of what a physician's one day looks like, but you haven't necessarily seen the day-to-day of it. So they want to see that you have put some time into shadowing, and that can be any sort of physician. I usually try to encourage people to find maybe 2 at least specialties so that they can see different perspectives. So let's say you shadow a family medicine doctor for a certain number of hours, and then you also shadow an orthopedic surgeon or something like that for a certain number of hours. Then those 2 together can give you both, an outpatient and an inpatient, or a generalist and a specialist kind of perspective, so that you can see what it's like to be with different types of physicians, and you've seen the kind of good things and the difficult things that each of those physicians go through. Again, all of this I know with volunteer activities and shadowing is going to be difficult during COVID. And all of those things, I think you have to, again, be creative and, again, be looking for ways to be proactive and try to get in where you can. So, for example, I know that some people are doing things like shadowing through telemedicine. So a lot of physicians now are doing telemedicine visits instead of seeing patients in person as much. And so some physicians are allowing students who are pre-med to also be shadowing through the telemedicine visit. So it's not the same as watching a physician do a physical exam, but at least you are in close contact with how that physician is interacting with patients in this sort of telemedicine age, which might be something that's very common in the future. There are also, for volunteer activities, a lot of things that people are signing up for to keep you involved during COVID, but that are not necessarily in person. So for example, a crisis text line is a very popular thing now. So you can still be helping people who are in abusive situations or assault type of situations, but you can be safe at home, but also still be assisting people that are in crisis. People have done things like deliver groceries or things to elderly people who can't leave their homes, or otherwise help elderly people who can't leave their homes. I know a lot of people have started tutoring for underserved students because they're all doing virtual school anyway. So trying to just help with giving them free tutoring so that they can still keep up with their classes in this virtual environment and everything. So there are a lot of opportunities out there, but you do have to be more proactive and creative in trying to find those opportunities. What the schools don't want you to do is just complain about COVID and say how hard it was for you, and not show that you've done anything with that time. So they are going to be understanding about the difficulty of finding opportunities. But if you're going to sit and just say, well, COVID was really hard on me because my MCAT got changed, and you haven't done anything better with that time to help humanity and help other people cope with this time, then that's not going to look as good. Whereas if you were to say, yes, my MCAT got canceled, but I also sewed 1,000 masks for people and donated them. I had people start up foundations to deliver masks to places that were in need, or I did this volunteer activity or that thing. One student volunteered to call elderly patients for a geriatric clinic to just make sure that they knew about their appointments, as well as had the means to be able to come, or how they would know, make sure that they know how to sign up for their telemedicine appointments and things like that, because they're not always tech savvy and things like that. So, anything creative like that that you can think of to really help other people during this pandemic time is going to look a lot better than if you don't. So it is challenging, but if you look for those opportunities and find them, it'll really benefit your application. Leadership and teaching is also important. As I was saying before, you want to have a longitudinal experience in any of the volunteer or tutoring things that you're doing. So if you, let's say, start as a volunteer, and then as you go along in your couple of years there, you kind of move up to the head volunteer where you're training the new volunteers and things like that, that shows some leadership and training sort of experience, which is really good. So that's part of why it's better to do that kind of longitudinal work, so that you can move up in your leadership abilities there. Whereas if you're just doing like volunteer activities for a month or 2 months at a time and switching, you're not really going to have as much of a chance to show that commitment as well as the leadership experience. Any kind of teaching that you can do, if you can be a TA or a tutor or a mentor, things like that, always looks good, because doctors are by nature teaching all the time. And life experience is also something that you can show in your activity section, and sometimes in your personal statement as well. Like medical schools want people who are very well-rounded. So if you have someone, or if you are very advanced in terms of musical ability, and you've been performing at fancy places, or if you are a very advanced athlete who's competing on, let's say, a national level or international level, things like that, those kinds of things are going to stand out very much for you. And it's good to write about those things as well in your activities section or your personal statement. Also, any kind of specific hardships that you might have gone through can be used in your personal statement as well. So these are all kinds of different things that you can be writing about in your activity section, which kind of rounds out your primary application. So we kind of went through this part of it. And then again, like I said, you have this lag time before generally you turn in your application at the end of May. The schools usually in a non-COVID year would get the applications around mid-June. And then after that, you kind of have a couple of weeks usually until they start to send your secondary applications here. And we're going to talk about how to work with your secondary applications. So the secondary applications in general, if you haven't heard about them, they are a beast in general. It is a marathon, like I said, not a sprint. And this is the place that a lot of students kind of get hung up a little bit, or it can be very, very draining. So knowing that, it's really good to prepare for this time. So what you can do for this is, if you think about it, let's say you apply to 30 schools and you turn it in on May 28th, the schools get them on June 15th, and then you start receiving all the secondaries around July 1st, let's say. That means 30 applications that they're asking you to turn back into them, and each one of them usually has some essay questions involved with it. So you're trying to write 30 applications with maybe 2 to 7 or more essay questions on them. That can take a very long time, and they all want them back within like 2 weeks. It's hard to do. So what you can do is look up a place like Prospective Doctor, which is affiliated with MedSchoolCoach, and we have this med school secondary essay prompts database that you can just Google. It's free. It's updated every year for the schools and their secondary questions. And you can just type in the school that you've gotten, and then it'll show you the secondary questions for the last cycle. Usually schools don't change their secondary questions very much from year to year. And so it's pretty safe to assume that they're probably going to stay at least similar to the year before. And so what you can do when you're in this period at the end of June where kind of nothing's going on, you can take a break for a second, but then you can start preparing for your secondary applications in those weeks by looking these questions up and starting to write out answers to them. Because if you already have answers that you have ready to go, then it's going to be a lot easier when you get that secondary to come in, and you can cut and paste pre-made answers that you're happy with, and you can just send them off right away. And it really decreases the strain when you actually start getting those secondaries in very quickly and in a very short time period in July. You can also look at the different common questions and kind of brainstorm about what kinds of answers you might want to come up with. So these are all really common that tend to come up a lot in a lot of different secondaries. Why do you want to come to this school? What kind of diversity will you add to the incoming class? What kind of challenges have you overcome in your life? Do you have any comments that you want to share that were not included in your primary application? And if you've graduated, or if there has been some gap in your education, what have you been doing since graduation, or why did you take that gap? Those kinds of questions are very, very common. So again, you can sit and think about diversity. What am I going to talk about diversity, and start thinking about how you yourself have been a minority or an other before, or how you've worked with people that are that way, and how you've been affected by that, and what kind of experience and growth you will bring to the class because of that. So you can start brainstorming those things so that when you get a question that asks about diversity, you can use that answer. Make sure that you're answering their actual question. So don't just cut and paste, because we can tell when you do that. But you can cut and paste the answer, but then edit it to make sure that you're actually answering the question that's asked. And that tends to get a whole lot faster if you know the answers to these questions already beforehand. Your secondaries are good to show off what your interests are. Again, you can talk about anything that wasn't included in the primary application. So if something has changed since the primary application and you've added on a new experience or something like that, then you can always talk about those new things in your secondary. And also, a lot of times they will ask you things like, why do you want to come to this school in particular? And you can answer your particular interest in that school so that they know that you are specifically interested in going there and not just trying to get into any medical school that will take you. Don't forget about the lovely Casper exam, which comes about at this time. The Casper is a 12-section online test, and it's used to test your personal professional characteristics. It's not really something that you can study for. It's designed so that you can't really study for it. It's more like they'll give you an open-ended sort of scenario or question, and then give you an opportunity to show your strengths, like your communication skills, ethics, empathy, professionalism, compassion. So they'll give you a few minutes to write answers to questions pertaining to those sorts of topics. So it's not something that you can really, get a book and study for, like it's not a science sort of a test. But it's one that kind of shows if you have kind of normal social skills, normal professionalism, humanism, ethics, morals, those kinds of things. And so just remember that you do have to take this exam. More and more schools are requiring it now. And usually we'll say to make sure that you get it done by the end of July. So sometime in that lag period or before your secondaries, it's kind of a good time to just take it and get it over with so that it's checked off of your list. How do you prepare for this Casper exam? You can get some information at prospectivedoctor.com and test prep materials there. You can make sure that you read about the exam before you take it so that you know exactly what you're getting into. There are practice questions online as well that you can think through, and you can sit with a friend who may be going through it as well and just talk through different ways that you might answer these questions so that you're just thinking about different ethical ideas as well as autonomy and justice and all those kinds of things that you might be able to talk about when you actually do the Casper exam itself. So now we've come through your secondary applications and we're coming up to getting lots of interviews, hopefully. So interview time is actually a fun time to just show who you really are. So it means that the school likes you on paper, they want to meet you in person and see. I always tell people, basically, are you someone that they would like to work with for the next 4 years? Are you personable? Are you nice? Are you kind? Are you a normal human being who can interact with other human beings and be someone that they enjoy working with? So it's a chance for you to show what your personality is and show how you do enjoy working with people and things like that. So, you know, being yourself and really being verbal in how you feel and who you are can be really helpful here. A lot of this is virtual now and on the interview days, of course. So it's important that you know what kind of an interview they're going to give you, because there are lots of different types of interviews. And it's also important that you prepare for that specific type of interview. And I like to tell people, make sure that you know how to prepare for a virtual type of interview. So you want to make sure like your camera is working, that the audio is working before the actual day. You want to make sure that you have good lighting, that you can see all the features of your face, because a lot of times I see when I meet with students on Zoom that their face is kind of in shadow and there's a lot of backlight, so we can't really see your face. That doesn't do so well on an interview day. You want to dress like you're going to an actual interview, at least from the waist up. I would suggest probably from the waist down as well, just in case you actually have to stand up for some reason during the interview. But, you know, a normal jacket and top, a professional conservative top is good. Hair and makeup, professional conservative. Background that's neutral and not distracting and things like that. You don't want like your laundry hanging in the back of on the wall and things like that when you go to these interviews and things. So kind of to summarize, you want to prepare that great primary application with your personal statement and your activity section. Make sure you submit everything on time. Get your secondaries prepared so that you can turn them in on time as well. Make sure you take the Casper exam, do really focused work on preparing for your interviews, and, you know, get help from other people along the way. So just so that you know a little bit about us, at MedSchoolCoach, we've helped over 12,000 students get into medical school and beyond. We have, I believe now, over 70 physician advisors, all with admissions committee experience. And we really love working with students and kind of helping you guys all along the way to make sure that your application is the best that you can have it be. So if you have any questions about any of that, please reach out to us and we're happy to help you. And I'm happy to take any questions at this time as well.
Yeah, so Dr. Choo, we've had a tremendous amount of questions come in, so hopefully you are ready for these.
I'm ready.
So let me ask the first. With COVID, it's obviously really hard to do shadowing. So the question here, which multiple people sent me actually, is virtual shadowing a good replacement?
Virtual shadowing is, I think, something that's probably necessary at this point. Is it an actual replacement? No, in that all of us know that a virtual shadowing experience just doesn't give you the same feel as if you're actually in the room with a person. But I've heard different things. Some admissions people think that virtual shadowing and shadowing in general is not that helpful. Other people love it. So I think that at this point, because there is no other option, I think virtual shadowing is a necessity. I think it's better to do it than to not do it, so that you're at least in a place with a physician and kind of watching what they're doing. It is, in my opinion, though, not a replacement for in-person. So if you can get an in-person shadowing, of course, at some point, then that's what I recommend doing. But I think that doing a virtual shadowing in the meantime, because of COVID, is fine.
So as a follow-up to that, what about people who don't take advantage of virtual shadowing? Do you think they'll be penalized?
Possibly. Only because, like I said, with shadowing, you want to make sure that you're showing that you've investigated the medical process. You actually know what a physician goes through on a day-to-day basis, and you still want to do it. And so if you have zero shadowing experience, then it just looks like you haven't necessarily investigated enough of what a physician does. And that is not the same as clinical work, because if you are, let's say you're a medical assistant and you're taking vital signs and getting chief complaints of a patient, you have a job to do there. So you're focusing on that job and you're not necessarily focusing on the physician and what the physician is doing. So the shadowing is mainly to make sure that you know what the physician is doing on a day-to-day basis. So just being around physicians is kind of not the same as having to watch a physician moment to moment. So I think there's going to be a lot more leeway that schools are going to give in general. Like before, I think if you had zero shadowing, it wouldn't look very good for you. Now, I think because of COVID, I think schools are going to be more understanding. But I think that if you can get some shadowing in, it's going to be better than having none and saying that COVID is to blame for that.
Great. So I don't want to turn this into a COVID 101 session, but obviously it's important with what's going on. So I'm just going to pass this to another question that's kind of related to that. And do you, just in your opinion, do you think it's likely that interviews are going to be continued to be held virtually versus in person?
I think so, in that I think a lot of schools are going to find, hey, this works and it's cheaper, So I think that if they find that they like this virtual format, that I think a lot of schools are going to keep going with it. That's just my opinion. I think personally, I think it's always better to get an in-person feel of a place and an in-person feel of who you're going to be working with before you make a decision. So I don't know what's going to happen next year. Let's say if COVID is not as much of an issue next year, probably some schools will start opening up to in-person interviews again. But like I said, if they've really come to love this virtual environment, then they might keep it. So I think people need to be aware and ready that this virtual interviewing thing might go on for some time.
So Andrew asked a good question, which I will actually start to answer, and then I'll pass to you. He was asking in regards to, hey, where do I find virtual shadowing? So just so you should be aware, and we don't have it yet, but MedSchoolCoach is in the process of developing a virtual shadowing course where you'll have the opportunity to shadow across every single medical specialty that's out there, or at least the top dozen or the top 20. We're actually building that right now, and you'll be able to get credit for doing that, which is actually a really cool thing. So that's something that we started to build now. There are other companies that already have virtual shadowing that's out there. So that was actually the question, and I'm sorry I stole your thunder a little bit, but
oh, I love that.
For students that are out there looking for virtual shadowing, do you have any recommendations on where they could look?
Basically, it would just be looking online on Google or whatever search engine you use to see what's available. Either you might have a program, let's say at the local hospital or school that has something going, or I know that there are programs. I have students telling me that they've started virtual shadowing programs that are just available for free online now. So it's just looking those things up. There are also some scribing companies who will allow for virtual scribing opportunities too. And that could be a clinical experience that does show a little bit, is closer to shadowing because you're watching so closely what the physician is saying and doing. But kind of just looking around online and at companies like MedSchoolCoach or others on YouTube and things like that too for free.
All right, so one COVID question, and then I'm going to jump to non-COVID questions, but I'm trying to keep them all on the same topic. So what about clinical experiences during COVID? How would you talk to that?
It's kind of the same thing, that you just have to be as creative as possible. So some people are doing things like becoming EMTs because they're always going to need EMTs to be on the field and things like that. So that would be a clinical experience. There might be some clinics who still need to hire people for medical assistant type of positions or front back office kind of positions that will take you on. You could work for, like I said, virtual scribing companies, things like that. I know that your group does a lot of clinical work, and I don't know if you guys are still doing that during this time, but any of those kinds of things are good to try to look for and get into. Understanding that, and I think that schools are going to understand that it's hard to do at this point, but just kind of looking out there as much as you can to kind of keep looking for opportunities at hospitals and things, and staying in touch with them as well, because things are going to change at some point And so if you, let's say, try to volunteer at a hospital and they say no volunteers right now, but keep checking in with them every couple of months to see if they've opened their doors and if you can get in as soon as they open and things like that. So it's going to just take more kind of following up with people and looking and trying to find that one opportunity that you can get to that's going to be helpful for you.
So the next couple of questions I think are kind of interesting because they're like these simple questions where I feel like if you know the answer, then it's so obvious. But if you don't know the answer, you're almost embarrassed to ask them. So this is the perfect forum to ask these types of questions. So I'm gonna give you a couple of those right now.
Sure.
You talked about secondaries for a while. When you receive your secondary questions, do you have to answer them all, or do you just answer a couple? Can you talk a little bit about that, how that works for the people who don't know?
Sure. Generally, you should answer them all unless they say a question is optional. If they say a question is optional, it generally is optional. Like if you really don't have anything to say, then it's okay to say that you don't. So for example, they'll say, if you have had any red flags in your application, any misdemeanors, academic probations, any failed grades or withdrawals, anything like that, then please explain that here. And for a lot of people, you don't have any of those. So then you don't need to answer that question, or you can say not applicable and move on. If there's a question that's something like, why would you want to come to this school? Optional. I would suggest answering that question because you want to show them like that you have looked into their school and you specifically want to go to that school. If they don't specify, then I would just answer all the questions to the best of your ability. So generally they're going to specify if something is an optional question. If it is an optional question, you can think about whether you want to answer it or not. And you should be as honest as possible in these answers and professional as possible in the answers. But if it is optional, you don't have to, but I would use your judgment. Like I said, if they ask you why you want to come to the school and that's an optional question, I would answer it. But if they ask you like, I don't know, something like, do you have any, what are you doing in your gap year and you don't have a gap year? Of course, you don't have to answer those kinds of questions.
So tied to that, what should you include in the question? Is there anything you'd like to add? So is that a question where you should just leave it blank, or what type of information should you dig for that you haven't already talked about in all of your other answers?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think that it depends on what the other questions were in the secondary as well. Because if they've asked you already things like, why do you want to come to the school? What are your greatest challenges? What have you done in your gap year? What are your red flags? And they've asked you all the questions and they're like, is there anything else you want to say? And you don't have to answer this question. If you genuinely have nothing else to say, you don't have to answer the question. It's okay. But if they haven't asked you a whole lot of questions and they say, is there anything else that you want to add? I would add things like why you specifically want to go to that school. What kinds of, and the more specific you can be, the better, by looking on their website, finding the programs on there that look interesting to you personally, and talking about what it is about that school, that location, their curriculum that make you want to go to that school. You can also talk about any kind of hardships that you've overcome. So for example, let's say you didn't do so well your freshman and sophomore year because multiple family members were really sick and you were their primary caregiver, so you were pulled in many directions, but you have this really good uptrend in your grades in your junior and senior year, and you have demonstrated that that was sort of just a situational kind of problem, but you are capable of doing the academic work. That's the kind of stuff that you want to show in those kinds of questions that you haven't had necessarily a chance to say somewhere else. Let's see what else. Some people will put like their diversity kinds of, there's a lot of schools will ask about diversity, and if the school hasn't asked about what kind of diverse experience are you bringing, then you can add that in as well. So you kind of want to look at what are the common questions that are asked and what's missing from this secondary that they haven't asked me about. Or if there's something extraordinary in your past that you haven't been able to talk about, then that's a good time to talk about it there as well.
So I have two more questions here that I'm going to kind of roll into one because they're sort of similar. And the first is about clinical experiences paid versus volunteer, right? So is it okay for me to earn some money? Or is
Yes.
it better that I look for a volunteer experience so that I can say that, hey, I volunteered for this? Does it make a difference?
I think both are very good. I don't personally, I don't think I don't think there's any problem with either. I think it's great if you can get paid for your experience. If you cannot, then that's okay too, if it's a volunteer sort of experience. But I don't think that getting paid for the experience is a bad thing at all.
Okay. And what about the type of experience? So for example, is, wet lab traditional over more qualitative research? Is there a difference between the two, or are med schools really just looking for the fact that you found something to do that was important?
Um, so with something like research, what they're mainly looking for is that you can do the scientific method, that you can apply the scientific method in some sort of a way that you can come up with a hypothesis, test it, and come up with a conclusion, and results where you can interpret those results and things like that. So it doesn't have to be bench work, basic science kind of research. However, if you don't have an application that has very strong science background, then it might be better to do some sort of a science, more of a basic science kind of lab work, just to show that you still enjoy doing scientific things and things like that. But in the big picture of things in general, as long as you're doing some sort of research that tests the scientific method in a reasonable and reproducible kind of way, then it doesn't really matter what kind of research that you do.
Thank you. I have two questions about the application itself. The first one is tied to the personal statement, and I think this is actually a really smart question. So is it more important to have a recent experience, so recency, or is it more important to come up with that point in your life where you were shaped, where you decided that medicine was the path you wanted to take, or does it depend?
I think it depends, but I think personally, I think having the experience that shaped who you are more is more important. So let's say when you were, this is kind of a cliche sort of thing, but let's say you were 7 and you got really, really sick and you were in the hospital, and that really shaped a lot of who you are and why you want to become a physician. I think it's fine to talk about that rather than talking about your volunteer work in the hospital like a month ago. If that's the more powerful experience to you, in general, a lot of times the more powerful the experience is to you, that's going to show on the paper. So it's better to do that. But if you're going to talk about a bunch of non-medical things that happened a long time ago, then they might kind of question like, this has nothing to do with medicine. Why are you telling me about it? So it is okay to talk about non-medical experiences. Like, for example, if you spent a semester abroad and you just grew a lot as a person from the experience and you want to talk about that, then that's fine. But if your whole essay is about that experience and doesn't touch on the medicine side of things, then that's a mistake, I think. So it has to have two things, basically your strengths and how you became the person that you are, but also why you want to be a doctor. And if those two things aren't in there, then it's not a strong personal essay. So, so it doesn't matter when the experience was, as long as it hits that criteria of showing who you are and how you've become who you've become. But it also needs to tie into why it made you want to be a doctor.
Gotcha. So for many of the people that are on this, there's not much you can do about this at this point, but for others, it might be early enough that you can still impact this. So I'll ask the question, how important is the difficulty of your major on your application? So for instance, bio versus biochem was the specific question being asked.
Personally, I don't think that makes much of a difference. The main question that schools are going to wonder is, can this person handle a graduate level of science courses? Because I'll tell you, I went to Berkeley. It's a rigorous science curriculum and I was a bio major. Going to medical school was much, 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 much harder than doing any of the Berkeley classes. And so what they want to know is, let's say if you're an English major, that's fine, but can you handle the rigor of the science material that's coming? And so if you are a non-science major, then you would need to show through your prerequisites and stuff that you can do that science work and you can do it really well. If you are a science major, choosing between, let's say, a bio or a biochem or a neuroscience versus a general or organic chemistry or anything like that, I don't think it matters as much as you show that you are able to handle a rigorous science curriculum.
Got it. Thomas asked a really good question. And right now, a lot more people are taking gap years than ever before because of COVID and the whole thing. But what are a couple of recommendations you could make to stay competitive during a gap year right now, especially in that so many people are taking a gap year? What can you do to stay competitive against all those other people who are also taking a gap year?
Yeah, so I think first you got to find something that you really are passionate about and that you love. Because if you have a passion for something, some kind of work that you're doing, then that's going to show in your application. So if you're doing if you hate research and you're just working a full-time research job and it's making you depressed such that you can't do anything else, it might not be a good, the greatest place to stay for a whole year. But if you're doing, let's say you're scribing and you really enjoy that and you're doing that part-time and you're also tutoring kids part-time for free and you're doing, these other volunteer experiences that really ignite your passion for helping people and for being in the medical field, then that's a great way to spend your gap year. It's also good to spend your gap year filling in the holes that you have in your application. So if you're looking at these activities and experiences, if there's anything that you're missing here, you should probably try to fill that gap during your gap year. So let's say I have done no shadowing so far. I would try to start finding virtual shadowing opportunities, so at least you can put that down in your application. If you haven't done any teaching, then I would try to find some virtual teaching opportunities or ways to be a tutor or a mentor or something like that so that you can fill that in. So this year is a good time to make sure that anything that you're sort of lacking in hours or it's not as strong as other parts of your application, fill in those holes so that by the time you apply next year, then you have a more well-balanced and well-rounded application.
So we have time for about 2 more questions, but before I ask them, I'm going to do a shameless self-promotion because I have to do that, right? At MedSchoolCoach, we have admission advisors where you can get one-on-one support. So you're not sitting in a class with 20 other people. You can talk to them about questions that are important to you and get direct answers on the things that you can do based upon your experiences in an effort to improve your application and improve your odds to getting accepted into med school. So we have enrollment advisors that you can speak with that will put you in touch with the right advisor for you based on your experiences. If you'd like to talk to an enrollment advisor, that is completely free. They're not necessarily going to answer every question that you have, but they can put you in touch with the admissions advisors who can. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share that link right here in the chat window so that you can sign up and get that consultation. And if that's something that you're interested in, we have different plans that might make sense to different people, but I'm going to just put that out there for you. There's no obligation. And now I'm going to go back to the questions because I don't want this to become an infomercial. So Holly asked a really good question. I actually don't know the answer to this. Is it okay to take a lighter course load for a semester so that you can study for the MCAT, or would that be looked down upon because you took a lighter course load?
I think that's absolutely a good idea to take a lighter course load your MCAT year. In general, if you think about it, people are looking through these applications pretty quickly because you have to, because you've got to stack this high. So you're trying to go through it quickly. They're generally not going to count your units for every single quarter or semester. So I think that it's better to take as low of a course load as you can, which gives you enough time to do the extracurricular activities that you want to do and make your application more well-rounded that way, while still, of course, completing all the requirements for your major and things like that. So for your MCAT year, it is really, really important to study and do well on the MCAT if you can. And so if you can pare it down to 13 units instead of 17, then I would absolutely do that so that you have more time to study for the MCAT.
Another question that came in was tied to the conferences attended section on the application. What are the different types of conferences and workshops I should put on there, number one? And tied to that, what if I don't have any? Like, is that okay? Or should I go out and find some just so that I don't have to leave that section blank?
No, you don't have to go to random conferences just to put them on the application. It's more about, usually it's more about things like if you presented at a conference, then that would be a good one to put down. If you were like your lab, because it was really pertaining to your lab's work, and the whole lab went to a conference, then that would be a good thing to do. If you're truly interested in some sort of a conference, then you can put stuff down, but you don't have to say that you went to X, Y, and Z conference that are kind of like random and have nothing like to do with who you are and stuff like that. You don't have to try to pad the application that way. It's more about showing like if you had an active role in that conference, if you organized the conference, if you were a speaker at the conference, things like that they want to see.
Excellent. So one more thing, I just sent to everybody an email address, info@medschoolcoach.com. If there's anything that came up today that maybe we didn't get to answer or that maybe you don't think about until tomorrow, shoot us an email. We'll try to get everything answered for you. The second thing is at some point, cross my fingers, hopefully tomorrow we'll send a copy of this video over to everybody so that if there's anything you missed or maybe you didn't take a note on everything, you'll get a copy of this video, or maybe you joined late, so you can get a copy of this video. So this will be sent to everybody at some point tomorrow, hopefully. Again, cross my fingers, I just need to find time to do it. Dr. Choo, is there anything you feel like you haven't had an opportunity to say that you want to make sure that everybody hears before we wrap this up?
I think the main thing is just to try to relax. It's a very stressful time, I think, for everyone. And I know that this whole process can be very nerve-wracking, but a lot of people have gone through it and you will get through it too. Ask for help along the way. Make sure that you plan early, and it's all going to be fine. So don't try not to worry too much. Just do your best. And if you have any questions, please let us know. We're very happy to help.
Well, thank you guys so much attending. I hope every single one of you gets into the med school of your dreams. So yes. Thank you so much for attending. I hope this helped. And like I said, there's a link if you want to get some advising from any of our admission advisors, or if you have any questions, you can email them to us. And I can't thank you guys enough for attending. And yeah, thanks again, and good luck on your medical journey, everybody.